about how Morgan County got its name.
Right, yeah. And so Morgan County, as some of you may or may not know, was named after General Daniel Morgan, who is probably one of the most interesting characters of the American Revolution.
Right.
The reason that they picked that name, General Morgan, these were frontiers people, and these were people who were going out to the wilderness, and which, hard to believe, but this was at that time the wilderness, and making homes for themselves, making a new life, starting a new government. But Daniel Morgan was a self-made man, and the people who were here in Morgan County at the time, there were about 30 Revolutionary War veterans who were living in Morgan County.
Wow.
In the early days of the county.
Wow.
So those people were connected directly, and some of them actually probably served under General Daniel Morgan at the Battle of Cowpens, through his campaigns in the South and also in the North. He was a remarkable man. But Daniel Morgan started his life in New Jersey. He was born in New Jersey with nothing really, to Welsh immigrant parents. He got in an argument with his father at age 17, left home, and just did odd jobs, ended up in Winchester, Virginia, and he ran a sawmill for a time. He was a teamster. He got a reputation as a tough guy. He was 6'3", I think, 6'4". At the time, that was a giant.
Oh, yes.
I mean, it's still big today, but at those
That
days,
time, that was giant.
So he was this imposing force. We have records from Virginia where he got into fights all the time, and disagreements with neighbors. So he was a tough customer. But he, as a teamster, he got involved with a campaign in the French and Indian War in the 1750s, where he went up to Pittsburgh at the time. Back at the time, it was called Fort Duquesne. And the British were in a war with the French, and they needed a teamster to run the teams of oxen and the carts. And so he went up there with them. It turned out bad for the British, and they lost that fight. They had to retreat from Fort Duquesne. And on the retreat, one of the British officers, who didn't think very much of the people like Morgan, the underlings, said something to Morgan that he didn't agree with. And he smarted off to this officer. The officer then slapped him across the face with the flat edge of his sword. And Morgan just hauled off and knocked him out. Well, you don't do that in the British Army those days. Well, you don't do it anymore now either.
Yes.
But in those days, that was almost a capital offense, because what they did was they sentenced him to 500 lashings, which at the time, that was a death sentence.
Oh, yes.
Most people did not survive 500 lashes. He did. But it put in him a mindset of, I don't like, the British,
yes.
To put it mild.
Yes, yes. I can see that.
Yeah. So he went back to Virginia, got involved with the militia there. And so he already had a good bit of military experience by the time the American Revolution starts in 1775. He raises a company of 96 men, riflemen. Now, these are what they called, these are what the frontiersmen were. They were riflemen. They had these long Kentucky rifles that were like 5 feet.
And they're awesome. We have one from my family.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get over how heavy it was.
Yeah, it's heavy, so you can imagine carrying that.
I can't imagine. That's the first thing I thought of whenever I took possession of it, was how heavy it was and how you'd probably have to set it on something in order to shoot it.
Took a long time to load.
Yes.
They were, and they were all homemade, so they were all different calibers. And, you couldn't trade bullets
different.
friend.
Yes.
Yeah. So
You could trade bullet. You didn't have.
no,
know that.
they weren't all standardized. So,
Okay.
so it was because they were all made by these different gunsmiths, but they were very accurate, much more accurate than the muskets at the time. So these guys, you couldn't put a bayonet.
It's long bat because of the long.
Right. It wasn't practical to put a bayonet on it. You couldn't fight that way. But these guys were very good hunters, very good, very accurate marksmen. So they were valuable. But you just had to use them differently. The American Continental Army at the time had to learn how to use these guys. So he goes up to the siege of Boston, and this is where this is after Lexington and Concord, and the British are in Boston. And so these riflemen get up there, and they're just picking off the British officers, which is, unheard of.
The snipers.
Yeah, they were
snipers.
They were sort of, and they learned a lot of these tactics from the French and the Indians from the French and Indian War. And Washington said, okay, you got to quit doing this. This is just unseemly. Later on, they'll change their tune about that. So, after that, Morgan has established himself as a capable commander. They go up to Quebec to invade Quebec City in Canada. That goes horribly. And the Americans, one of the American generals is killed. One of them is severely wounded. Benedict Arnold is the general at the time. He was later a traitor, but at the time he was one of America's best generals. Yeah, Morgan has to lead the charge. They get surrounded and captured. And so Morgan is there. He's a prisoner of war from 1775 to 1777. So he's stuck there. Eventually, there's a prisoner exchange. He gets back in the army, and Washington actually has a lot of confidence in him. George Washington, who's the commander of the Continental Army, of course, and he gives Morgan his own command. And so I'm talking a lot. Is this okay?
Yes.
Okay, so he goes up to Saratoga, New York, which the Battle of Saratoga, which was one of the turning points of the war. This is the battle that really convinced the French that the Americans could win, and so they could join in with the Americans. But the way they won that battle, he was there with a couple of other generals, General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, again, who's still a good guy. And they win this battle by outsmarting the British. Again, the snipers are picking off all the British officers, and so there's a lot of chaos. Very confused. They're in the tree line. Can't be seen. They're so far away. They can just pick these guys off. So that's a huge part of the battle. And they win that battle, and the French join war. So Morgan is rising in his fame, but he's kind of grumpy and grouchy about the fact that keeps getting passed over, because he's not a schmoozer. Daniel Morgan is a straight-talking guy, rough and tumble, as we've said, and he doesn't play the politics game very well. So he's not in Philadelphia, New York, or wherever, making friends with.
They can just name.
Yeah, so he gets passed over a few times, so he kind of pooches his lip out and goes back home to Virginia for a while. But they call him back in the service. He goes to Washington. Eventually, they promote him to Brigadier General. They say, okay, we need him. We need this guy. So they promote him. And he is at the Battle of, he's sent to harass the British in the South Carolina and North Carolina, and bust up all the supply lines and the formations, picking off supplies and harassing troops. And there's a British general who finds out about this and sends a guy named Bannister Tarleton after. And if have you seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson?
Yes.
So that's loosely based on Morgan's actions at that time.
Wow.
So if you've seen that movie, you know something about, and the bad guy there he's supposed to be Bannister Tarleton. It was real rough with the countryside, kills civilians supposedly, does a lot of bad things. And Morgan knows he's in good graces with the local people, with the militia who have fought Tarleton before, and they know that he's a hothead. He has very low regard for the militia. He thinks that Americans are just rabble, and he's kind of a snob. And so Morgan concocts a plan. He's going to meet Tarleton, kind of lure him in, and have his militiamen up front. And so they're going to pick off as many of the British as they can and then turn tail and ride. So Tarleton's going to think that they're cowardly and they're just going to head for the hills. But once they get to a certain point, the Continental Line, the regulars that are also under Morgan's command, are going to shoot into, they're going to join the fight. And then his best troops are from the very last, and they end up just encircling Tarleton's men, and they just devastate them. And that's called the Battle of Cowpens. So the Battle of Cowpens in South Carolina, and that really cements Morgan's reputation. That's 1781. So anyway,
So I remember as a student at growing up about wondering about the whole Stephen Decatur thing, and I remember studying about Stephen Decatur and the Commodore Decatur and all that. But I never even thought till today about the whole Morgan part, right? About why we were named Morgan County, right? And so I had no idea until today, and I thought I knew a lot of things about us that we were named after a.
Right, and like I said, it's easy to understand why frontier people would have really identified with this.
Yes, and admired him.
It admired him and his qualities, and so I think that was an easy choice for them to rename. They renamed the county. Our county was first called Decatur County in 1818. Was first founded as a county. But then in 1821, a lot of these veterans probably pushed for it.
Yeah.
Actually renamed after Daniel Morgan.
Yeah. And I'm looking forward to another day, him sharing this story about how Decatur kind of stole the courthouse.
Yes.
So that's a story for another day. So he's got a lot of stories like this to share, and that's the ones I'm looking forward to tell. For not only for the What's Happening with Steve, but that fits very much into the DecaturStories.com, whole Decatur Stories group that we'll have at Facebook page.